Our sponsor for this evening, as I mentioned, is the Grayson Jockey Club Research Foundation. And in the initial conversations when Grayson came on board, you don't need to be getting nervous, Holly. I'm not going to put you on the spot just yet. I was delighted that Grayson were interested in supporting something like this, and to have an organization like them supporting this, because the level of support that they give the industry, and a lot of it is happening, I think, without a lot of us even realizing the extent of it. Since 1940, Grayson have supported research projects to the tune of over $44 million, over 450 projects, and I think across 48 different universities, both across North America and further afield. Their support to all things equine, while it probably has quite a thoroughbred history, its support now crosses all breeds and sectors, and it's like anywhere where there can be good quality research to benefit equine health and welfare, it has been supported to an incredible tune. So before we go any further, I'd actually like a round of applause for Grayson and all that they do. I had never had the opportunity to actually go and visit until this morning, and what I thought was probably going to be a quick stop-in ended up being quite a lengthy visit for myself and my friend Holly, who's traveled over as well, because we were both fascinated by the place, but particularly fascinated by you. You're an incredibly knowledgeable individual, but it was also the manner in which you share that and communicate that we really, really appreciated. I think what's always helpful, we have quite a mix of people attend events like this. It's not just breeders, it can be vets, aspiring vets, riders. The Rood and Riddle that you started with versus the one you're working in now, I think has transformed quite a lot. But before we go into that, could you give a little bit of an overview from graduating as a veterinary student to your current position in Rood and Riddle, and what that path looked like? Because sometimes it's helpful for those in a similar space to know kind of the winding path that takes people to their current destination.
Absolutely. And just wanted to say thank you so much, Michael, for having me here, and thank you to the Grayson Foundation as well. I'm really excited to be here. So I grew up in Brazil, so I'll start a little bit further back, but grew up in Brazil, moved here when I was 6. We moved to South Florida down by Weston, and I always loved horses, and I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian, which is probably a lot of everyone else's stories as well. But I actually had the great opportunity to attend the Royal Veterinary College for 1 year, and we spoke a little bit about this today. And I think my love of reproduction started there when I was on placement for animal husbandry placement with a sheep farmer and his family, where I lived with them for a month. I had never touched a ewe before. I had never seen a lambing before that. And it just opened my eyes to everything that you can do with a veterinary degree, as well as in the reproduction sector. I really enjoyed the neonatal medicine and also just the pregnant ewe medicine there. So I think that's where my love of reproduction started. And then I had the opportunity to come back to Florida, finish my degree at the University of Florida. I did an internship at Equine Medical Center in Ocala and went on to do a residency at Texas A&M, and I was board certified in 2017. At that time, Rood and Riddle had just opened a new clinic here in Florida. I knew that I wanted to get back to South Florida. Most of my family was still living here. And we made a partnership, and it's been a wonderful one so far. But we started from a very small clinic to which now we don't have a very small clinic anymore. It's become quite an astounding place to work. We have several veterinarians, several specialists, and we've really built a nice reproductive practice for our clinic down here.
How is the audio? Is it okay, or it's not the aircon isn't interfering, is it? All good, even at the back? Perfect. Could you tell me what your experience has been with the Grayson Jockey Club Research Foundation, and what was your first involvement with that? Because I think it's a nice tie-in for the event, not just having you here in your own expertise as as a local veterinarian here, but I think it's a nice tie-in that you have personally had an experience with Grayson. And could you give us a little bit of insight on that, please?
So I think as an avid learner, which is something I think I will be for the rest of my life, we've all been very fortunate as veterinarians to benefit from everything that Grayson has been supporting. There's a lot of really wonderful research projects that are out there. And as you said, since 1940, they've been doing this. So we're really lucky as veterinarians to have that. But I think as clients, you should also be lucky to utilize some of the modalities that they have on their website. There's a lot of information about the studies that they are performing right now. So if something, strikes your fancy or there's something that you're really interested in, I encourage everyone to go onto their website and see what they're funding currently. Because as you said, it's not just in the thoroughbred world, it kind of spans all disciplines now. And there are some very exciting reproductive projects that are going on.
When we were going through the visit earlier and we were going through building to building and this building's for this and this building's for that, like there's quite a lot going on in Rood and Riddle. I think the majority of people here in terms of tonight's event are probably going to be most interested in the reproductive space. Could you touch on some of the reproductive services that you currently offer at the moment?
Sure. So we are a full-service reproductive, both referral clinic as well as regular breeding management. We span, mares and stallions, both. We have a breeding shed. We are USDA certified for export of frozen semen to the EU and the UK. We manage stallions for breeding soundness exams, fresh semen collections, cooled semen, and as well as frozen. And then on the mare side of things, breeding management, embryo flushing, embryo transfer, as well as OPU and ICSI. So we really run the gambit. We do not have an ICSI lab at our facility here in Wellington. However, we have an ICSI lab at our campus in Lexington. And we've just been very graciously joined by a new embryologist, Mateus Felix, and we're very excited to have him on. He comes from UPenn. He has an enormous wealth of information, and I think he's really going to guide us in the direction that we'd like to go with our ICSI lab. So we're really excited for what's to come in the future.
And as if two facilities wasn't enough, you also have Saratoga as well. So it's quite the scope within Rood and Riddle. What I'm always curious, and I know every case is going to differ, every season's going to differ, but when mare owners are bringing their mares into you, are there particular reoccurring challenges that crop up that both the avoidable and the unavoidable, like what are some of the main challenges when mare owners are bringing their mares to you that are maybe prohibiting their success in terms of getting pregnancies or embryos? Like, are there reoccurring challenges that you're seeing more often than not?
I think one of the main challenges we have is time sometimes. We're here and everyone is here to show usually, and maybe at the end of season they decide they want to start breeding their mare. And I think it's with so many new modalities and different modalities for breeding your horse, I think starting the conversation early with your veterinarian in the fall is a great way to just set yourself up for success. If you're interested in breeding, have a conversation. We can start working with mares in the fall to set them up for the spring. Even if you don't want to do anything while they're showing, if you want to do it after, we can certainly do that. But when we get the time crunch of 2 weeks, a month that they're still here, if we had started a little bit earlier in the fall and had a baseline, maybe gotten the mares to some wellness checks originally to see, just get them to a place where they're reproductively healthy, because if you're not systemically healthy, you can't be reproductively healthy. So I think starting early is a really good plan. The other thing is that some of the new modalities that we're utilizing, OPU and ICSI, we can do that in the off season. So having a conversation with your veterinarian about what that looks like for your mare. we can freeze embryos in that case, since it is outside of the breeding season and we won't be transferring them. So I think we have a lot of options, and starting the conversation early is something that I would really recommend. The other thing is, the unavoidable is, well, we do get your mare pregnant and then you're leaving and she loses her pregnancy before you leave. So we don't have the luxury of having 2, 3, maybe even 4 breeding cycles. So if we start earlier, we can not avoid that problem because it might happen regardless, but we can give ourselves a little bit more leeway. And I will tie this into Grayson because I think that there's some really great work that Mandy Demestri out of Cornell is doing on early embryonic loss, and where they used to think that a lot of the early embryonic loss, which we define as less than 65 days of pregnancy, was due to maternal factors, the uterus, the ovaries, but she's actually finding that it's really due to genetic abnormalities within the embryos themselves, usually additional chromosomes that are there. So I think that's really exciting that that's on the horizon to really kind of give us some more information as to why these mares are losing their pregnancies. And with this information, what can we do? Will we potentially have a blood test at some point that's going to tell us if the embryo that your mare is carrying has some sort of genetic abnormality? And then what decisions can we make at that point, so that potentially if your mare loses a pregnancy, let's say 45 days, 60 days, we aren't out this entire season as well.
A lot of the mares that are coming to you, I suppose, being on the doorstep of Wellington International, and a lot of there's seasonal visitors, but also there's some permanent ones. Could you just give an idea? Because earlier I was kind of surprised at the breakdown of, we'll say, mares that you're dealing with that are more career brood mares versus the mares that are current competition mares. What's that looking like for you at the moment?
Yeah, I thought a little bit more about it after we talked, and I think it's more maybe 60-40, 60% that are athletes and maybe 40% that are career broodmares. And I think they become career broodmares because something happens during the season. So then they come to me because they're off either for a short amount of time or a prolonged amount of time. So I do think it's around that. We don't have a very large foaling population down here. It's difficult to find a lot of space to put foals. So most of what we're doing is assisted reproductive technologies. I'm not saying that we don't have any foals on the ground, we definitely do, but it's a lot more embryo transfer and OPU ICSI. And
I guess, again, just from some of the people in the room, some are visiting or some are local, but in terms of managing our expectations as breeders or breeders to be, what are some of the factors if there's someone that has a competition mare, they want to avail of your services, either for embryo transfer or OPU, what are some of the typical factors that we should be taking into consideration that will affect somebody's success on whether they get an embryo, or even in terms of, you can take this in two ways, embryo transfer in terms of some of the factors that are going to influence our success of getting an embryo, but similarly for someone that's going down the OPU route, some of the factors that are going to affect the quality and the quantity of even oocytes that are collected.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with just the embryo transfer first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the OPU ICSI. So for embryo transfer, I think that it's really important for us as veterinarians when we're dealing with, which is our typical population, are typically maidens that are older. So they're over, they're 15, they're 16. So I think that for us, the cervix is really important. And I know Dr. Newkirk touched on this last year too, so I won't spend too much time on this, but mares that have not had foals before, their cervix is not dilated. So I think we find sometimes that when we are going down the embryo transfer route where we have to conventionally breed a mare and then we flush the embryo about 7 to 8 days later, we can get hung up a little bit with some increase in inflammation and a lack of drainage of the uterus because that cervix doesn't dilate enough. So I think that's something that we have to be open with our clients about, that potentially we're going to be performing a lot more aggressive management when breeding a mare, and trying to schedule that with their show schedule, I think is very important as well. Mares that have not been palpated before may potentially need sedation. So I think everyone has to be on the same page. We all have to be very open and transparent with one another as to what our goals are and what the mare will actually be doing during the amount of time that we will be working on her. And then with OPU and ICSI, there's a really, really nice study that kind of showed as you get later and later in age for mares, ET and OPU are very similar in results, and then until you get to a point where OPU is probably the way to go. And I think that with some of our aged mares, we can start seeing some decrease in oocyte quality. So we talked a little bit about this before, but there's some products that I really like that can potentially help kind of change the follicular milieu or the follicular environment that could potentially set us up for more success when we're doing OPU ICSI. And the same thing would go for ET or breeding your mare to carry. These aren't specific supplements for OPU. They would be something that could potentially help full cycle.
So at the moment, you touched on it a little bit with your new embryologist in Kentucky, but can you talk me through the process? Say, for instance, I have a mare, she's looking quite special, nicely bred, well-related, but the plan is to continue in competition. Mm-hmm. So, present her to you, doing OPU. Talk me through that as a process, what can I expect? But also then, after that process with yourselves, what's the rest of the process look like for that mare owner?
Sure. So OPU or ovum pickup is a procedure where we aspirate follicles on a mare's ovary and we recover oocytes. The oocytes or eggs are shipped to the in vitro fertilization lab. At the lab, they're matured and placed into culture media. Once they mature, they will actually be injected with 1 sperm each. So that's the ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Those will then be placed into culture media again for about 7 to 10 days. From start of the aspiration procedure to the finish of the procedure, you have about maybe 12 to 14 days before you know. So I typically tell owners that we won't really know what we have for about 2 weeks, whether we're successful or not in producing a pregnancy. Typically, recovery rates in horses for oocyte aspiration are about 50%. So they had to be difficult, right? So if we're doing oocyte aspirations in cattle, 90% recovery rate, perhaps. You go in, you aspirate the fluid, you get your follicle, or excuse me, you get your oocyte. But in horses, the oocytes are actually tightly adhered to the granulosa cells, which line the follicle, and therefore it makes it a lot harder for us.
Can you repeat that last bit for me? That last line again?
Yeah, so the oocyte, the egg, is tightly adhered to the follicle. So it's not floating around that fluid in there until actually the triggers for ovulation occur. So when we're going in and we're taking these oocytes out, we're actually having to go in, scrape the follicle with our needle, push fluid, aspirate fluid several times in order to hopefully dislodge that oocyte. So we typically have about a 50% recovery rate. So let's say your mare has 20 follicles, we get about 10. And if we're really lucky, more than that, and that's great. So it becomes a numbers game at some point because of those 10, they have to be sent to the ICSI lab and be matured, and about 60 to 70% of them will mature. So let's say 6 of those mature, and those are injected with 1 sperm each through the ICSI procedure and placed back into culture media, and then about 20% become an embryo. So that's about 1.2. So the labs are getting a lot better, though, I will say. So where we used to say a few years ago that we would have 1 embryo per 2 to 3 OPU sessions, we now can say probably 1 per session. And I'm being generous because there are many factors that go into reproduction and fertility, so stallion factors, mare factors. So not every OPU session is going to result in an embryo. However, if you have a fertile mare and a fertile stallion, and the labs have been doing really well in producing 1 embryo, or sometimes even more.
What do you think have been some of the kind of standout factors that have increased that success rate? Or is it just down to practice? that obviously more people, the more the vets who are working in the assisted reproduction space are getting more and more practice. But are there other factors that are contributing to that success?
That's a good question, and you've stumped me a little bit because I don't work in the IVF lab, so I can't comment too much about what is placed in the media or things like that. But I think that just with time and practice, a lot of labs are sometimes formulating their own medias and finding that potentially they're getting better maturation rates, so more oocytes to actually be able to inject, and potentially better rates of embryo production there. But that's about as much as I know about that.
Just as a breeder, and when you hear different conversations around people doing OPU or ICSI, a lot of the time in the conversation, the non-veterinary conversation, it feels like there's nearly a stance that it actually doesn't matter what the quality of the stallion's semen is like because of the nature of the process. But I wanted to get your opinion on that. Like, how much does it matter? Because in the industry, there are lots of stallions that are incredibly popular, very successful, high-profile show jumpers, for example, that are very poor fertility, maybe only available through ICSI, and it's like, it nearly seems to be, oh, the semen's so bad, we'll just go the ICSI route. But how much, when you're getting down to such a level of precision, where the oocytes, or if I'm using the correct terminology, I don't know when they stop becoming an oocyte and when they start becoming an embryo, or if it's just down to fertilization, but how much, in your opinion, does the quality of the semen matter when there's such a level of like precision or involvement with that process?
I think it's a big factor still, even though we are bypassing fertilization. There's so many steps to fertilization, and just because we are bypassing the one where the sperm attaches to the egg and all of the other mechanisms occur there, I still think that if a stallion has poor quality DNA in their sperm, then you're still not going to be able to produce an embryo. And you actually might be able to produce an embryo, but potentially has some chromosomal abnormalities, and it might not make it to the what's the word I'm looking for? Not the level, but maybe to where it's developed enough and where it's viable enough to either freeze or to transfer. So I think that even though we are doing a lot of manipulation, I think fertility does play a big impact. And when they're choosing the sperm, of course, they're going to be looking at the sperm under the microscope that look normal, that are swimming normally, that don't have any abnormalities of any of the parts of the sperm. So they're trying to choose the most vigorous swimmer that looks normal, but we don't know about quality of DNA when we're just looking at sperm under the microscope. So I do think that does play a factor.
And it's helpful also to hear you say that, because again, it's another part of the noise or the chatter that you hear in the reasons against OPU or ICSI, is that there's a feeling that there's no selection on the semen, or it's not it's not the quickest swimmer and all those things, but there is still a level of selection.
Yes, we're trying to maximize everything, and I think the more manipulation you do in vitro, our success rates are lower every time. So we want to try to get the best possible outcome for our clients. So we need to choose what looks to us like the best sperm. So I do think that sperm quality is important. OPU, ICSI, it was originally developed for subfertility or infertility. So it does allow for us to use semen from stallions that are subfertile. However, we still might not have the best results, but it is a way for us to still make embryos. So I think that's really great that we can do that, because there's many wonderful stallions that may be subfertile, and by utilizing this process, we can still produce embryos from them.
Something that I really liked when we were talking earlier was the collaborative nature of how you work and think. Because in every space, we can often, it's very easy to take the view that, like, by reaching out to someone in your space, that it's showing a lack of knowledge or showing some weakness, or it's like leaving a door open. And I was really glad that in our conversation that like it was so much the opposite with you and your collaboration either with other vets in a similar space here, some of which are in the room, and further afield. But could you touch on that, your own personal view on that, and why you think that's so important?
Yeah, I am the first to tell anyone that I don't know everything, but I will try my best to find someone who does know more than me in order to get to the goal that we want. So for me, I'm less concerned with the competitive nature of equine veterinary medicine and more concerned with doing the best job for my clients. And if that means reaching out to someone who knows a little bit more than me, I won't let my pride get in the way of that. And I've built some very great relationships with veterinarians here in town, some in the room here, as well as in the surrounding space, so that we can all accomplish the goal that we want, which is a pregnancy. And I mentioned to you that for me, it's really important to get a mare pregnant the first time and not see my client until the next year when I'm rebreeding her. It brings me a lot of joy to be able to do that for a client, because I think that does forge a very good bond, and I'm very open and transparent with my clients, and I feel that client education is really important. And by utilizing the connections that I have with fellow veterinarians, breeding managers, even people who are interested in pedigrees, if there's a question that I can't answer, I will at least try and search for someone who can.
2 questions left for you. I often like to take the stance of, like, if you give someone the magic wand in their space, what would be your wish for the industry? If there's something in your space that you could change, fix, improve, create, or make go away, what would that thing be?
So I mentioned transparency already, but I think transparency between breeders, transparency between, semen that gets shipped over here, semen that's produced here. We're very, very lucky to be part of the Select Breeders affiliate system. That's a quality control system that several clinics here and abroad are part of, and we're all trying to get to the same goal. We want to produce good quality semen that we can, sell commercially and get mares pregnant, because that's the goal for everyone. So I think in our space currently, I would love to receive some semen with information so that I can guide my clients appropriately. And it might be a little hard to ask, because if stallions have been frozen 10 years ago, that information might not be available for us. But again, since client education, transparency is so important to me, I think that it would be really beneficial to all of us to have more information so we can all make educated decisions. I don't think that it makes something better than something else. I just think the more information we have, the more informed decisions we can make.
And finally, whenever I'm doing any of these interviews or conversations, I always like to end with getting the advice for the younger generation in a person's space, whether that's a breeder or a rider or a veterinarian. So from your perspective, for either some of the younger breeders or the younger veterinarians in the room, or that are going to listen to the recording around the world of this, what advice would you give to young vets coming through in the industry?
I think, we're all going to follow our hearts, especially for equine vets. We love horses, and we've probably loved them for a long time, but I think just building strong relationships with both your colleagues as well as your clients, I think is going to really suit everyone well for the future. So just be kind and ask questions. There's no stupid question. So I think, as a young veterinarian, don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to reach out and speak to different people and just forge those relationships, because you never know in the future what you might need and who might be around to help you out.
Super. Thank you very much. Can I please get a round of applause for Dr. Walbornn? Thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to welcome Alex Jayne to the stage. And as I mentioned, for anyone that wasn't here at the beginning, there will be an opportunity where everyone comes back on stage together. But I'm now joined on stage by Alex Jayne. the number of hats that you've worn in the industry is it's quite a long list. You're not someone who I feel you can put into a category of you're this, because you're a breeder, you're a trainer, even in terms of what you breed. You've bred jumpers, you bred hunters. I think you've even trained for both, not just in your own kids, but in other young athletes. So I'm really interested to have this conversation because I think you'll have a lot of different perspectives because you've seen the industry from several different angles, firsthand and as an observer. You're operating in at least 2 different locations, and there's multiple strands to the business. Even within your own family, it seems like everybody is now looking after different roles within the broader business. For those that you don't know or mightn't be as familiar with you, could you give a little bit of insight into the family involvement? Because even you and yourself, like, this is a multi-generational involvement in the horse industry. I think you're onto your 7th generation of horse people with some of the grandkids at the moment.
Right.
But particularly with the immediate family and with your own kids, could you touch on some of the involvements and what roles each of you play in the extended family business at the moment?
Okay. I'm a 5th generation horseman. So my children were 6th, and their children now are 7th, which are competing and showing here. And I've done all of it. I rode as a kid, I showed as a kid, I became a trainer, I took people through the Olympics, I took my own son through the Olympics. I've worn every hat there is to wear. I actually started breeding when I was 40 years ago. When my children started riding ponies, I realized we needed a lot more ponies than I had. So I bred about 45 ponies. So when my daughter was actually born, I had 45 ponies in the field for her to break and get going, which we did start very early. But now as the business has grown and evolved, my son-in-law, who had 0 horse experience when he came on, now handles all the breeding stallions and the semen shipping and all of that. I still handle most of the brood mares, but between my son-in-law and myself, we do all our own insemination. We do almost everything ourselves. I do the gelding myself. We do as much as we can to keep the costs down because we do it. I mean, our biggest year, I think we've had 22 babies. Our smallest year, I think we've had 3. So we've been at breeding the horses for about 12 years now. And then my 2 girls mostly do most of the breaking. Once the initial dust is knocked off, I've got a little bit of a cowboy that gets them started, and once I'm sure they're not going to hurt anybody, then my daughters pick through them and decide which ones they want. So, between my son-in-law handling the semen and the breeding, and we've had some very popular stallions, so we've sent a lot of semen around the world, actually. He handles most of that aspect. I handle most of the day-to-day aspect with the mares, and my 2 daughters and son handle most of the riding and the training. So it truly is a family operation, and now my grandchildren are starting. I've got 4 ponies at home that are 4 years old, and they're starting to break all the ponies. So it's a wonderful life. It really is.
What was the point when you decided you were going to start breeding sport horses? It sounded like you were very proactive with the ponies, because to have that many ponies accumulated before your daughter had arrived, that was quite forward thinking or forward planning. But when did you decide that you were going to, I guess, seriously transition into your sport horse breeding program, and what factored into that decision at the time?
So I was unbelievably successful with the ponies. Of the 45 ponies I raised, 44 of them won championships at A-horse shows. So I mean, they were just, if you bred a good pony to a good pony, you got a good pony. It was so easy. I'm like, oh, this breeding is a breeze. So I had some good horses that I bred, and I raised a lot of donkeys. And I thought, yeah, horses aren't so easy. And I kind of got out of the breeding business altogether. The kids outgrew their ponies. You were buying a lot of horses in Europe. And finally, I got a client who bought some very expensive horses for my son, and suddenly I had all this fabulous DNA at my fingertips. So I had a talk with Mrs. Thatcher. I said, maybe we should do some breeding. So she agreed we should, and we commissioned 22 embryos that year that we put in donor mares and recipient mares, and we had all 22, which is a miracle, produced foals. So suddenly I had all this international DNA that my son was showing at my fingertips, so we started plucking eggs out of the mares. I mean, we were flushing mares while they were in FEI here to get the embryos out. So it just kind of happened. Suddenly I had these phenomenal horses at my fingertips, and I thought, I should try this breeding again, because now I've always said it came down to the best mares, and suddenly we had all the best mares available, and so I said, let's give it a go. And so that's what we did, and it's turned out very successful for us.
From how you started it, in terms of your approach, what you were looking for, what you bred with, from the early days of that sport horse breeding program, say phase 2,
right,
to now, do you still approach it in the same way, or have you?
No.
Yeah.
There's so many things I wish I knew when I started. So I decided Athena was my son's best horse at the time, and I decided I wanted to get a baby out of Athena. Well, $8,000 later, I still had no baby, and I thought, I just can't do this. I don't have the money to just throw into the wind and think I'm going to get a baby, and it just wasn't working. So my vet came back the next year and said, are we going to try again? I said, no. I said, I literally can't afford to do this again. And I said, I proposed a deal. I said, how about I give you a list of mares and a list of stallions, and I want babies out of them, and you produce these babies for me, and when they're weanlings, I will buy them back from you for $10,000. Well, that was the 22 babies that I got. I gave him a list of 12. He did duplicates. He said, we're not going to get them all. He did duplicates, and I said, if you get a duplicate, I'll buy them. I will buy any of them. Well, I got 22 babies out of it. And that was the start. So then I bred those mares and carried on. What I didn't realize was the mares that were actually carrying the foals, to me, have a tremendous amount to do with the sort of foal you get. So the epigenetics that carry through from the mare, so if we put an egg into a small little Arabian, it seemed we got a small, somewhat flightier horse than I would have expected. If we put it into a big draft horse, we got a slower, quieter, I wasn't getting the international sport horses that I wanted when these embryos were being placed in standardbreds, Arabians, Appaloosas, Morgans, whatever. And that's literally what happened the first year when I had the 22. I mean, we did get 3 international horses out of it, so I'm not saying it doesn't work, but overall, I really think the epigenetics and what you're putting your embryo back into plays a huge part of it, which I was completely ignorant to when I started this whole operation. So as time has gone on, and I've, perfected my thoughts on the whole breeding episode, my daughter had a baby 2 years ago, and I took her Grand Prix horse, and we did ICSI with her to Chaco Blue, some will say the best stallion in the world, and we only got 1 embryo, and they're like, well, what do you want us to put it in? I'm like, put it back into my same mare. I said, I want my Grand Prix horse to carry this future Grand Prix horse. I don't want to put it in a recipient mare. I want the donor mare to actually carry the foal, which we did because my daughter was pregnant. She wasn't going to be showing. We put her back in, and I think I've raised maybe my best. He's 4 years old now, but he looks to be possibly a very international type horse. So I didn't realize at all, I had never even heard of epigenetics until I got into it. And I would be much more selective. Now, if somebody offers me a mare to breed or to whatever, I'm so selective. I mean, it's had to been sound its whole career. It's had to, I just don't take anything that anybody gives. It's easy to accumulate garbage, and it's not worth it. You've got to have the best mares producing. If you're truly aiming to breed international horses, you have to be playing with international horses. You can't put an international egg in a standard bred and think you're going to get an international horse. You might get a very good horse, but you're not going to get the quality that I was seeking.
In terms of the mares that you were breeding from at the beginning versus now, how much has that changed? Like, do you find yourself a lot more critical now of what that mare that you're going to breed with needs to be, or the characteristics that need to be present in her before you'll, like, pedigree aside, regardless of kind of if she's well related or not, are you finding yourself a lot more critical today in terms of the boxes she needs to tick? Or how are you viewing that?
I've always been pretty critical, and I never think I bred just average, because I knew early on. That's what I did my first go around 20 years ago. I was breeding good average horses to great stallions, and I was getting sub-average horses out of it. So when I started this go around, I only bred international horses to other international horses, hoping that I would at least get national level horses, and we did get some international horses out of it. But and I will say, as far as the epigenetics go, I raised my first year of the 22 that was placed in a lot of odd mares. Their foals all bred truer. So say I got 3 small horses that barely hit 16 hands that should have been 17 hands. When I bred those mares, the genetics seemed to come through, and second generation and third generation, I don't have any runts anymore. I don't have any, the epigenetics that were there for the first group of 22 seems to have completely gone away. Now I'm on to 4th generation. So, but by the 3rd generation and 4th generation, it seemed I was playing with the DNA that I wanted and not the DNA that I maybe got mixed in with the sub-recipient mares.
From the time of the foals hitting the ground to being of age where they can come into one of your kids' programs, what does your raising process look like? Because it sounds like there's a few different bases operating in places that you send them out to.
So I was very lucky. There was a Trakehner breeding farm down the road that had closed its doors. So they had a giant run-in shed and 100 acres, and everything was beautifully fenced, and it was just sitting there empty. So when I started this breeding process and suddenly realized I had 22 pregnant mares, I went and made a deal with them, and all my mares foaled out there. They were all raised there. They all were weaned there. As yearlings, we trailer break them. I would take my trailer over my farm. My training farm is only 5 minutes away, so it was very convenient. So we would go gather up the foals. We'd teach them to load and unload. We may do 3 or 4 days of loading and unloading. We'd give them a short trailer ride to the farm. We called it boot camp. We'd tie them up. We'd do that. We'd take them home. All of my foals from early on, we tie up weekly. Tie up weekly and groom them. They just aren't feral out in the field. They all learn to tie from day one. They all get their feet picked. They all get, proper veterinary care. As 2-year-olds, we bring them in, we saddle break them, I throw a kid up on them, we lead them around, we get them walking and trotting around the ring. If I'm feeling spicy, I may put up a little X to see what they look like when they go over an X as a 2-year-old, just so I get a preview of what I might have or might not have. But then back in the field. As 3-year-olds, I bring them in twice for about 2 weeks to a month, depending on their own personal disposition and how easy they are or aren't. They get about 30 to 60 days of work as 3-year-olds. They go back out in the field. And I currently have 8 4-year-olds waiting for us that will break and go into work. And once they come in as 4-year-olds, they stay in. So that they do most of their growing up in fields, but they get a lot of trailering experience. They get tied up every week. They get groomed every week. They come to the farm for boot camp, back and forth. And then as 4-year-olds, when we go back now from Wellington, I'll go pick up the 8 4-year-olds, bring them in, and they'll go to work and they'll stay and work till we bring them here to sell them as 5-year-olds.
So is that always the goal, to sell from 5 on if they're showing what you want them, like if they have the qualities that you're looking for?
Yes.
The goal is from 5 on.
The goal is to bring them here and sell them. That's the goal. And there's been a few that we've kept. I mean, there's a few that I think, this one really looks special, let's hold on to it. And luckily, those have become Grand Prix horses for us. So, there's been a few. There's some that I've sold that have become Grand Prix horses, which is great. That's what I want. I mean, I'm not going to keep selling horses if they think, oh, he only keeps the good one and sells the rest. I sell them all. They're all for sale. But there have been 2 in particular that I really was fond of, and we've developed them to Grand Prix horses that my kids are currently showing.
Is loose jumping something you ever do, or are all the assessments that you're doing and making either what you see in the field or under saddle? Do you ever bring them in and loose jump?
We do. We bring them in and loose jump them, but I don't hold a lot of stock in the loose jumping. I've had some that have wowed me beyond belief, that by the time you get on their backs, they're donkeys. And I've had other ones that look like donkeys, and by the time you get them properly broke and carrying themselves, you start jumping them, you're like, I never saw this in the chute. So I like it in the aspect that it teaches them to go from one side to the other. So by the time we have our jockeys up on them, they know if they see something in front of them to hop over to the other side. But I personally don't hold a lot of credence in the free jumping.
And that's what I think is interesting, especially in Europe. We're very fixated on free jumping, and I think it's a great thing to make liars out of us. So I was just curious to see if that was something that you factored into your program. When you're making those selections on what you feel is good enough to keep and to bring here, because even though they're 5, to come here with a 5-year-old isn't going to be cheap either. So you need to be fairly sure about what you have. What are the boxes that those horses are needing to tick? And similarly, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things, if you see in a horse in those younger years, you're thinking it needs to go well before?
Well, soundness is huge. They have to be sound. And luckily, I've raised a lot of very sound horses. Temperament is huge, because though my children are very skilled riders, most of the people we're selling them to are juniors or amateurs or something else. So that they have to have a temperament that you think is going to be saleable, and not some hothouse flower that only an Olympic rider can ride. I mean, there's a place for those too, because if they're talented enough, we've sold some to some Olympic riders. So, I mean, that's great too. But we try to really make sure we're breeding horses that have sound minds, sound bodies, and are going to be saleable when we get down here. They have nice mouths, they ride nice. We have them broke enough that a junior and amateur is going to get on and not think they're going to get run away with, or not have any brakes or steering. So I don't expect a lot of them at 5, because we really don't do, like, we don't show them as 4-year-olds and then bring them here and start showing them as 5-year-olds. A lot of my horses, the first time they actually show is when they walk into the ring and the 5-year-old jumper's here. So, we don't, I'm old school. I think every horse only has so many jumps in them. And if you start jumping them at 4, you're not going to have those jumps when they're 14. So, I mean, we wait and we really preserve our jumps. And we watch over them, and my kids are all the same way. They're very conservative about when their young horses jump and how much they jump and how much they show. So.
The fact that a lot of the breeding that you've been doing, or my understanding is, and like what you've touched on, a lot of those mares that you're breeding from are former and current competition horses, either of yours directly or maybe clients and things like that. What are the traits that you have felt over the years have been most transferable? Are there certain things that you see more often than not the mares are giving to their offspring, or that because you have the advantage of really knowing the mares, are there certain traits that you're seeing that more often than not have been coming from those mares?
Yeah, I think jumping style and their overall athletic ability certainly comes a lot from their mothers. And like I said, I've been extremely fortunate to have some international horses at my fingertips that I was able to start this whole breeding program with. But I really feel that, if you have a mare that was athletic and had a successful show career and either had a nice style of jumping, I'm a little old school. I mean, I know there's lots of international horses that maybe dangle their legs a little bit and still win Grand Prix after Grand Prix. I like a horse that, has a nice vestibule and pulls its knees up high, and those are the mares that I bred and tried to breed and try to produce. And, we all are breeding what we hope to be international show jumpers, but, many of my horses have gone on to the hunter rings and won lot because most of my mares have very nice technique and good dispositions and that. So, I think the classic jumping style, the natural vestibule, pulling their legs up as high as possible and tucking them up is something that I've always looked for, and I think we've produced a lot. If you watch my young jumpers go around the ring, you can almost stop any of them in the air and they all look like a hunter. Their legs are pulled up and wrapped tight, and I do think that carries through from generation to generation.
With the hunter wing to your business, do you ever deliberately set out to try and breed the hunter?
No.
So you're repurposing horses for that market?
Yes. I mean, I've had clients that have hunters that have bred to produce hunters. I myself personally, I've raised some hunter ponies intentionally. We don't breed for pony jumpers, we breed for pony hunters, and the ones that don't work out as hunters become pony jumpers. With the hunters or the horses, we produce jumpers, and some of them have, end up being beautiful movers and end up style. You can hit the jackpot very early on with a young hunter more so than a jumper. I mean, I can sell a young hunter for a lot of money that may only be 6 years old, more so than you're going to usually get for a young jumper that's 6 years old. But we don't intentionally breed the hunters, but we have gotten some very good ones out of it.
Is that just down to personal preference and interest? Because it sounds like it mightn't be the worst commercial decision if you were.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, if I have a young horse at home that he's 4 years old, and I think it's the best hunter I've ever raised. I didn't intentionally raise him as a hunter, but he came in, he's quiet, he's beautiful, he moves like a 10, he wraps his legs around his ears, he's quiet, he's a hunter, so I'm not going to make him into a jumper because that's what he's supposed to be. He might be a very good jumper too, but he's going to get marketed as a hunter and sold as a hunter, and they will sell much quicker down here as a young hunter than as a young jumper. So,
once you make that decision, how does their program differ from the jumpers? With the jumpers, you're aiming to have them here at 5. What does the path look like for the hunters?
We do almost the identical thing. We will ride them different. They'll jump different jumps. They'll have different training. We'll ride them in a lower, looser frame than we would a jumper. Their flat work is different. We do everything to promote them. I don't say they'll do less, but they will probably do less because, hunters, we like fat and lazy and I don't want to say unathletic because that's bad, but we like to really keep things low key and low. And really the good hunters train themselves. There's not a lot we have to do. They have the beautiful jumping style by nature. They move beautifully by nature. So, we're just bringing them along. I do a lot of schooling down here. You can come up and basically school for nothing on Tuesdays. So we do a lot of that with the young horses to keep the costs down, because when you have as many as we have, they can't all show every week. I'd be broke. So, we do a lot of schooling, bring the horses up, school them around, see where a hole may be lacking in their equitation, in their education, and then go on from there to try to produce what we need by the time we're ready to show. I try not to walk into the show ring till I think we've got a pretty good shot of winning. So, costs too much to show them and not win.
At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the stallion element to your business. What does that look like now? Because my understanding is that it was Dolph van de Bishop really started that for you guys and probably influenced your decisions to kind of go back trying to breed international horses in general. What's the stallion business like now? How many stallions are on the roster? But also, what have you found the experience of being a sport horse stallion owner in the US to be like?
Dolph was incredibly popular for many, many years. He won the 7-year-old championships in Europe. We bought him. Before they shipped him to us, they asked if they could collect him. They collected him like crazy. Well, it went on that he had 7 international 5-star winners when his first group of foals hit. Well, when that happened, he became even more popular. They used all the semen they had in Europe. They came to us trying to buy the stallion back. We ended up selling them a lot of semen, thanks to Stephanie, and we shipped it back to Europe. And so he clearly was our foundation stallion. We bred one of my son's good horses to one of Shane's best horses, and got a young stallion. He was our junior stallion, and now I have a Shaka Blue stallion at home. So we only have 3 stallions that we use. I have semen that I bought from other international horses around that we will use or have in the freezer to use, but the majority of our horses have been a mix of the 3 stallions that we have.
You'll have to give us the names of the other 2 now.
Okay, we had Colter de Moulin, who was a top horse in Europe. He was the top speed horse in the Super League, and we bought him as an amateur jumper, and he was very, very successful. And then we had Arizona, which one was of our own bred, and then now our junior stallion is, I gotta think of what his show name is, Aikido Blue. So those are the...
Just to give everyone a chance to look them up, because especially on the recording, I know people will be screaming at the recording for the name if I didn't ask you that. Commercially, I know this is a kind of a broad question, but as a stallion owner in the US, do you see it as a viable commercial business?
Dolph it was, for sure. We made a lot of money with Dolph. I mean, we sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of semen back to Europe. So Dolph, because he had the resume he had in Europe and his offspring were dominating the international ranks for several years, he was like a gold mine. That would be like a dream come true for a breeder. Our other 2 stallions, which are very nice, have not generated near the income that Dolph generated. It's more of a love for the sport. You're not going to make I could have made a nice living off of Dolph. He kind of helped float the boat for all of his youngsters. But the other 2 stallions, which are certainly very nice and have produced many top horses, I can't say you could make a strong living off of them.
In your opinion, as someone who's involved in the different aspects of the breeding space here, you're breeding quite a few foals. Like you are, I was going to say by US standards, but even by European standards, you're probably a large breeder with the numbers that you're operating at. Where for you do you see the biggest gains being possible in how particularly the industry here could better support or acknowledge breeders? What are the things that you think, as you're going through your daily jobs or your daily life, are there things that you think, I'd love the industry if they do this for breeders, to recognize, to support? Do you have any ideas?
Well, our horse shows in particular at home let our young jumpers show almost for free, which is amazing. They give you your stall for half, they give you 0 entry fees. You have to pay the USEF fees, but I mean, they let you show your 5, 6, and 7-year-olds for free. So as far as for developing young horses in the state of Illinois, it's quite economical, which is great, because I mean, breeding a young horse and bringing it along and showing it are all huge expenses. And to be able to eliminate one of the expenses, such as show fees, to me was huge. And I mean, people always ask me what to do, and I said, well, it would be nice if trainers could bring their young horses along and it didn't cost them an arm and a leg to show them, and the show management listened and has done that. And even honestly here, to show young horses, not crazy expensive. They keep the fees very reasonable for the young horses. Not as reasonable as it is in Europe, but certainly more reasonable than most. You don't have a $1,000 show bill every week. And as far as bringing the young horses along, I think that's a huge part of it, because you're not going to be able to market them or show them until you build up some sort of a resume on them. I've sold very few horses out of my ring at home unless they have some sort of a resume. If I take them to horse shows and get some videos, and maybe if we're not showing, but I still have something to show, I mean, I'd say we've sold 10 horses just off the internet from people buying them just off of videos, which is great, but that's not the norm. Nowadays, people like to see them show in Wellington. They like to see the resumes. Until you're going to get really any sort of true money for them, they have to be produced properly. They have to have the proper results, and keeping those expenses down to get those proper results, I think, are key for the breeders in the United States.
So, something that came up when I was doing my homework, and a theme that came up, was how in your training capacity, what I read is, you're very good at making sure that riding is fun. That seems to be a priority. Could you talk me through your views on that in your training role, and how you approach it, and why you think that that's important for gaining and attracting the future generations?
I trained my own 3 children to ride and made them all international riders and national champions and blah, blah, blah. The list goes a mile on. I'm now starting over with my grandchildren, which I have 6 of, and keeping the boys' interest has always been harder than keeping the girls. I mean, girls want to go ride the ponies, girls want to go in the barn, girls want to live in the barn. The boys want to get on and off as quickly as possible. We call it Pony Palooza, and every Saturday I set up an obstacle course in the ring that kind of looks like American Ninja, and they have to get off the pony and climb over racks and walk across the walls, and I have obstacle courses built for the ponies, and we do as much as we can to keep, play games, put it in, they have to grab a ball off of a cone and drop it into a basket at the other end of the ring, and just games to keep it interesting and fun, and keep them still learning the sport, but they don't even, their balance is improving, and all of these things are improving, but they don't even realize it, because it's not push your heels down, shorten your reins, use your corner. Those aren't the things we stress when they're 4 and 6 years old and 8 years old. We've got to have fun, and they learn to go over the cross rails and they learn to jump, without even thinking about it, because it's just part of the game. And I've really had great success with that. I mean, I trained my 2 daughters totally different than I trained my son. My son looked like a sack of potatoes his whole life growing up, because if I had put the screws to him the way you would train a little girl, he would have quit. And he won equitation finals just like the girls did, but he all came into his own later in life. And I'm doing the same thing with my grandchildren. I'm trying to keep it as fun as possible, and everybody looks forward to Saturday when we build our obstacle courses and have fun and play games, and then we use little parts of that throughout the week, and then we tear the course apart and build something totally different for the next week. So we do everything we can to keep everybody smiling all the time and just making it a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I can't remember which article or interview. I think it was an interview with one of your daughters, and I really liked that that approach in an industry that can be very serious. I liked that approach was being taken. Lastly, particularly speaking to the breeders in the room, or the breeders that are going to be watching this recording back, what advice would you have to younger breeders or to breeders that are in the early stages of their breeding program?
Try to get the best mares possible. I mean, that's so important. You've got to start with quality if you're going to get quality, and if you don't have a real top quality mare, save your money till one comes upon your doorsteps. I mean, there's always opportunities to get mares that have been injured or hurt, and somebody's looking for a place for a mare or whatever. Don't breed your old retired horse that was a medium amateur hunter or was a really good 2-6 horse. That's great, but you're not going to get what you want. You've got to breed top quality to get quality. I always, whenever I start here, my expectation is I'm only going to get this. I never think I'm going to start here and the stallion's going to turn it into this. It just doesn't happen that way. So unless you're starting with a very high level, I don't think you're going to get a high level horse. There's plenty of hobby breeders that just want to breed their mare because it's a romantic idea to have a foal, and that's great, and it's fun, and it is romantic. I'm not going to say don't do it, but if you're truly trying to breed top show horses or top international horses, you've got to start with quality.
Great, thank you very much. Can you please put your hands together for Alex Jayne? Thank you. And at this stage, I would like to invite our third and final guest on stage. We have Shane Sweetnam, who, among the many achievements, most recently won the WEF Challenge Cup beforehand. So I was thinking that's great because it gets us off to a great start and it'll have you in flying form. There's a theme between last year. This happened accidentally. I was saying it to Dr. Walbornn earlier that last year we started off with an American, an Irish person, and a Brazilian person, and we've kind of accidentally managed to do the same again with our panel this year. So as I mentioned, we're on to our third and final speaker, and after this, then I'm going to get everyone back on stage. What the Jaynes have experienced with the multi-generational approach, I think, is maybe something that's looking like the Sweetnams are heading in the same way. It seemed like growing up, all your siblings were involved. Your parents are like very much involved. Right to today, they'll still be here cheering you on. And now it's amazing to see the next generations coming through and enjoying such success, both in your kids and some of your nieces and nephews. But for those that don't know, could you give me a little bit of an insight into your early days in your show jumping career and what that looked like before you delved into the US?
Yeah, so feels like a different life now, actually. My parents are very passionate about the sport, and I think that's why all of my siblings and myself and their kids and my kids are really into it. It all started with them. When I'm in Europe, they still go to as many shows as possible. They're here at the moment for a month. They love it, and it's obviously translated down to us, and we've been able to make a career out of it. But when we were kids, we started riding ponies. I had a little paint pony when I was 7, and if we got past fence 3, we'd finish the course. If we didn't get past fence 3, we didn't finish. But you learned a lot about about work ethic with it, because you had to do you didn't have grooms or anything like that, so you had to be able to do the stables and the tack, and then when you got home from school, you go ride, and then the chores. So it set us. And I think all of us are in, my brothers, my sisters, and myself are all in little bit different fields, but we've all done well because we've all had work ethic. And I think that the horses and the ponies really gave us that, and thanks to our parents for that. So that was the beginning and the start of it. And then I went to school and I went to college, and honestly, I didn't really. It was different times back then. We weren't sure what kind of opportunities there would be in show jumping, and I was doing well in ponies and in young riders, but it wasn't my goal to go and become a professional. I didn't think I was good enough, number one, and then I also thought it was a very tough life. And nowadays, obviously, it's changed. There's so many different areas, whether it's nutrition, veterinary, the breeding, the managing, the grooming, the transport, everything, the publicity. The sport has been turned upside down. You can make a good living in lots of different things with the horses. But back then, I was very unsure about it. So I finished my degree in Limerick, and then I said I'd like to go to Europe for a year before I get a job or do something office related, and just to see what kind of experience it would be. And then it sort of opened the door that I could come to America after. So I ended up coming to Wellington for 3 months, and I'm here since.
What was that push to go? You were around 22 when you moved to the US, is that correct?
Yeah, I was just 22, I think.
So you've been now living in the US, hopefully nobody's good at maths, but you've been living in the US as long as you lived in...
23 years,
yeah. Okay.
So just over half my life. So
what made that push? Like at the time, what factors led into that decision to come over here? What were you hoping to find? Because from what you're saying, there was uncertainty if career as an international show jumper was an option.
Yeah, so honestly, it was to come to get the experience. This is, no one knew what, now everyone can watch live feeds and streaming and Facebook or whatever, and you see what Wellington is, or you can see what it can be. We had heard that, this place is unbelievable, and there's shows showing for 12 weeks, and, it's all in the same area. So it was to go and see what this was like. And then I was lucky enough when I was here, obviously, witness what opportunities could be out of it. And I was lucky enough that Margie Engel offered me a job with Hidden Creek, who were doing a lot of breeding back then, but they had a lot of young horses and needed a brave Irish fella to come and work there. And then that opened the door for me to say, okay, I'll get a visa and I'll stay a year. But I always say this: America is still the land of opportunity. It still is now. If you want to work hard and you're honest, and you have good work ethic, you can get very far in this country still. So I think it definitely, when I was here, I realized that, and I've been working since.
From your experience at Margie Engel's, what were some of the main learnings or some of the things that are still with you?
Oh, a lot. Like with young horses, if a lot of people here are involved in breeding or have young horses, you have to be patient. And that that translate from till they get to 4 and 5, but that it also translates from when they get to 5 to the Grand Prix ring. And even with the horse that won today, you know, he's a bit sharp, he's a bit quirky, but we had to be patient, and still being patient with different classes and the right classes and stuff like that. So even back then with Margie, with Hidden Creek, you know, and she's still the same. She definitely taught me that, you know, patience was a big thing, and you know, I think horses will teach you to have patience.
It's amazing both in what you've said and in different interviews that you've done in the past. It's come up in nearly every time you do an interview. You have been very quick to say either you didn't think you were good enough in the underage ranks. Now you still had a European, at least one European underage under your belt, and possibly even a medal out of it. But this has come up a few times I've seen where you maybe had question marks on your own ability or what lay ahead. And it's amazing to hear that, considering you have 2 Olympic Games under your belt, a World Equestrian Games, and 5 European Championships later. That's incredible for someone starting off that maybe had those question marks on themselves. But
well, that's the truth, you know, and that's the reason I have been successful, is that I'm real about it. I understand that at that stage, yeah, I was good. I had a very good pony. Actually, we won a medal. I had a good horse, and all thanks to my parents for having, you know, they were older animals, but they were good teachers, and good horses will make good riders. And then when you're a good rider, you can make a good horse. So, but I was, and still am, I'm still very aware of where I am, or where I should be, or where the horse is, or where it should be. And then also the great thing about this sport is that when do you have to retire? I don't know. You know, so there is, time is on my side. So I still believe that, you know, you have to be aware of where you are at those times. And at that times, technically, you know, I was competitive and I was brave and everything, but, you know, educational wise, I didn't know as much as, say, if you were coming out of, my kids now are coming out of a professional yard. Of course they know that, you know. So it's a different upbringing, but because I was aware even back then I went to Holland, I learned off Riddle. Then I came to America, I learned off Margie Engel. So I always knew I had to learn, and that has stood to me since.
after Margie's, there was a very key person and place that was going to come into your life that was going to have a big impact on your international career with Lisa Laurie and Spy Coast Farm. How did that come about? And at what sort of a time frame?
Yeah, so I think it was like, is it 20 years now? 19? I'm bad with years, but I was helping her daughter. She was training with Helen Barbel at the time, and we got on really well straight away from the start. And she hadn't.
Maybe turn the mic a little.
Still, yeah. I'm sorry. She hadn't really got going with breeding or anything like that at that point, and she ended up buying, I think, Liz McBride Jr. for me to jump in the bigger classes here, which was a big deal. We did our first 5-star here, and then after that it sort of got really going, and she really was passionate about the breeding and having good mares and good stallions, and it hasn't stopped since.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the horse that came into your life that seemed to be a significant breakthrough for the two of you together was Amaretto Darko. It seemed to that was probably the point where it probably took you on a few notches. Can you talk me through Amaretto and what some of the qualities were, or what some of the strengths were?
Yeah, Amaretto Darko was an amazing horse. I was a green rider, so now if I had him, is he as good as James Can Cruz? Maybe. At that stage, he was the right horse for me that got me into, First Nations, Senior Nations Cups, then championships. He was amazing scope, amazing brain, amazing talent, and really, honestly, brought me to the level that's my foundation of this sport, and it's because of him that I suppose I compare every Grand Prix horse to. So it really set the bar.
Is there anything in particular that stands out in terms of what he taught you or what you learned from that experience in partnership?
I suppose there was nothing we couldn't do. I think one of the first, I don't know, was it 500 grand, but the first finale under the lights here, he was clearing it. So, and then whether we were jumping to Dublin Horse Show, the Aggie Can, he was double clearing that. The championship in Madrid, we were in the top 15 or something. So, and he was as brave as a lion. There was nothing that fazed him. And as a rider, that gave you confidence, and it probably set me in that same mode as well. So, his mentality, as Alex said earlier, the brain, it goes a long way. And from the very start, he had the right brain, and he definitely kept it all the way through.
In your opinion, what do you think differentiates those good horses from the great? Because since then you've had a number of great horses. Do you think there's particular qualities that the really great horses have, and maybe are having greater, either have that the good horses mightn't just have, or having greater quantities? Like, is there something, if you think of the really great ones that you've had in your career, are there extra qualities that those special ones really have?
They're smart. The brain is a massive thing. They understand, the great ones understand what that moment is about, and they understand they have to jump a clear round when they're in there. And they're different characters, like Amarillo Darko was very smart in one way, but it was a real pet. About things. Then James Cancruz is super smart, but he's grumpy and likes his own space, and he loves the ring. He's a bit of a show-off, but he understands what he's meant to be doing and what he wants to do. So I think the brains factor is a big thing.
And it's something that comes up a lot of the time when you hear top riders talking about top horses. It's that brain or its internal qualities. And just curious to get your perspective on it, because when you're working back from that and trying to find the next James Cancruz or Amaretto Darko, do you think it's possible to really assess that or know that, say at the stage that you're looking to be buying horses at? How much of an assessment, or do you think that that's something that you kind of have to hope for the best and learn as you go?
No, there's a lot of factors. Breeding's obviously a massive factor. There's certain, if I'm looking at the pedigree of a horse, there's certain stallions I won't go near, or there's certain stallions that will, bring my attention to. At the moment I have 4 Cumil foes, jumping at a high level, like the one today. But he's obviously a great horse, but it's not just from Cumil Foe, it's from his grandmother. His grandmother won these classes as well here with Eric Lemez. So I think the breed, obviously a horse gets your attention, but then you go through, you do your homework and you look at the lines a little bit, their history a little bit, and then if you get as far as to trying the horse, then you have to have a good feeling with the horse. And when you try to know as much as possible about the horse as you can in that trial, but being fair to the person that owns the horse already, and being also fair to the horse, because maybe the horse isn't developed yet to show you everything he's got. And the great horses also, some of them might take longer for them to show it. Maybe they're a great horse when they're 11. They might not be. They'll have the tools when they're 7 and 8. But you have to try to look through that and say, okay, can I work with this horse, this brain every day till it's 10 or 11? That this is my future Grand Prix horse. And if it can be good enough to win a 4-star, a 3-star, and not win a 5-star, it's still a very, very good horse. So you have to be aware that this could take 2 or 3 years, but maybe I don't get my 5-star winner, but I still have a bloody good horse. So all that things have to be taken into consideration, and you need a bit of luck.
Have you a desired age, or is there an age that you don't really like going below? Like when you're looking for horses, is there a preferred age that you like them to be before you'll take them on into your program?
It's a difficult question. I suppose the way our year is run, you know, me having a horse that's 6 is too young. 7, if I really think a horse is special at 7, then I'd like to have it then, because I can build a relationship with it. That's not to say I'm not aware of when I see a good 5-year-old or 6-year-old, but probably for our model of being in America, and the shows we're doing all the time, which is normally FEI shows, it's better that they're 7 upwards.
When you're trying those horses, even in those first few minutes, are there specific things that those horses either have to have, or have you certain pet hates that if you see something in a horse, no matter how good of a jumper, for example, it is, you're thinking, no, non-runner?
Normally, when I'm going trying a horse, we've done a bit, you know, I've obviously seen the videos and done a bit of homework, so it's not wasting people's time, you know, or jumping a horse for the sake of jumping it. That's not fair on the horse or the owners. But if it's a bit more feeling, really, and then if I feel after a few jumps that this isn't going to work, I won't keep going, because I don't think that's fair on anybody. And then, you know, and horses will surprise you if the feeling keeps being good, and as you go along, normally they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves with their performance or their weaknesses or their strengths. But, you know, normally when we get to that point, I'm fairly open-minded.
So there's no particular pet hates, pet peeves that if a horse has, if somebody says, either shows you a video or you go to try a horse, I suppose when you've gone to try a horse, like what you said, you've done a few different stages before that, but is there anything that you just won't accept regardless of how good of a jumper a horse is?
If it's a brilliant jumper and it doesn't have you can tell that it doesn't really have a great brain or great mind from the trial, then probably you're working already behind. So, basically when you're in with a trial, I always find if the horse is working with you, even if it's not the most talented, you know, if it could be a good amateur horse or a good junior horse, that's still a good horse to have, especially in our business when you have kids and stuff. So, if it has a good brain, then it'll go far. If you feel that it doesn't really in the trial, then I won't do it too much.
Either from, I know things will have changed a lot from when you were based in Ireland, but obviously you still have family operating there. You're still going to be keeping a relatively close eye, I'm sure, on what's coming through or what's good. You're obviously seeing what's happening here in terms of young horse production. What do you see as maybe some of the common mistakes on the young horse production front? Or how would you like to see more people producing the young horses?
That's a difficult question. There's a lot of different roads to Rome, as they say. So, you know, for me, if you think it is a super talented 5, 6, 7, I really don't get too wrapped up about results, or about championships, or about finals, or anything like that. I just would like the horse to be, you know, making its targets with its jumping size level. You know, most you'd like a good 7-year-old to be jumping, say, 140 by the end of its 7-year-old year. It doesn't, maybe 140 is fine, but depending on the horse. But I'm not so obsessed about results. You know, I like the fact that if the horse has a career of jumping clear rounds, but you know, it doesn't, you know, obviously there's a lot of people that make a living out of producing young horses to winning Dublin or Zangerside, and it's a career. So, you know, I'm not going to say that that's the wrong way. It's not the wrong way. A lot of these horses go on and do good things, but it wouldn't be my style. But I'm lucky that I have Grand Prix horses. I jump at FEI shows every week, and I can be patient till that level. You know, if I'm a younger Shane Sweetnam in Ireland, and I have 2 7-year-olds and I need to sell them by the end of the year, then, you know, then it's a different story. So, but I do think for the really good ones, if they can be patient, that they're just, you know, not running them as young horses, I think it makes a difference.
Do you ever find yourself that you're put off what looks like a promising young horse because of the amount that has been done with them as in the young horse classes?
No. If I like a horse, then I like a horse, you know, and I look at it, what's in front of me. So no, not normally.
Could you talk me through what your current team looks like? Because you're obviously having to manage a few different components. You're traveling a lot. You have clients that you're going to need to be working with and training. If you're away, obviously the business has to keep ticking over here. Could you talk me through some of the core team and the roles that they're playing at the moment to keep your business ticking over?
Yeah, so we're lucky with Sweet Oak Farm that we have a big staff. We have for a long time. I don't train as much as I used to. I do Lacey Gilbertson and Ashley Vogel at the higher level, and then my kids when they want to listen to me. But we have Mikey Hughes, Paddy McNamara, and they do most of the training with the jumpers. And then my wife obviously makes sure that it's running smoothly when I'm there or not there. Yeah, so we have a big crew that really know their part, and they're very reliable, and they're very diligent about it. So it makes my life easy to go to Europe and as my wife says, on holiday with my 2 horses.
You seem to operate on a much more quality over quantity. I don't think you're a rider that ever has massive strings. You seem to have a smaller group of high quality horses. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
Like yeah. It's not big international strings as such.
Yeah, it's well, I don't know, is it by choice or not by choice? Firstly, to find those standard of horses, it's very hard, and then to keep them. You know, I do sell a Grand Prix horse or 2 Grand Prix horses a year because I own part of them myself, and I'm very lucky. I have good owners that are partners with me, but they're investments, so certain horses do get sold. And then, but basically to keep going all the time, I think it's the standard of the horse that makes the difference. So having a lot isn't going to make my life easier. Having the right ones will.
At the moment, obviously, it's the likes of James Can Cruz that gets so much of the airtime, particularly when you come home. Obviously, being an Irish bred, everyone's feeling a lot more invested. But could you give us just a brief overview on what the current top string looks like? What are those horses, and just to touch on who they are and a few of their kind of standout qualities or standout strengths for anyone who's less familiar with your broader string?
Okay. So obviously James Can Cruz is the main guy. The team, you know, and most riders will have this. They'll have their, like Kent, they'll have Gray, and the team will be built around that horse. So I've had him obviously a while, and every year you're trying to have enough support for him that he can do his best year. But that's, like I said, it's hard to have the horses up to that level that can go to 5 stars all the time. So it starts a good bit of time ahead of trying to produce a horse to be that level, or as a backup horse, which is still a 5-star horse. Like last year, Corian that won today, I got him. He had to go quite quick because I didn't really have many horses, and actually he went like a duck to water, and he was able to jump at nearly won Devon. It was second in ACK and placed in Dublin. So he really fitted in quickly, but it was a bit of a surprise how quickly he did it. And then Rural Jur is one that Lisa Laurie bred. He's a very talented horse, but the same thing, I've big ambition with him this year. But I spent last year, I brought him to all the shows in Europe. He did the youngsters in ACK, and he just did the smaller, the 140s or 145s at Le Ball, Dinard, Dublin, with the idea that this year would be a big year for him. And that's what I was saying, not caring that he would win any of these things, was more that he'd be ready to do his job this year, which he is. He was clear in the Nations Cup last week. He was second in the Grand Prix already. So that horse, luckily, Lisa bred him, has bred it's by Presley Boy out of Durley, which is the same mother as Killer Queen. Durley jumped Olympics herself. So, a great advertisement for Lisa's set up there. And obviously a horse we knew from a very young age that we thought actually could be this. So, and I'm lucky to have him. And then I have a few other horses that we'll see where they're at the end of Florida. They've been going well, so we'll see how good they are then.
As I mentioned at the beginning, with the championships, the 2 Olympics, the 5 Europeans, WEG, and a whole raft of very good Grand Prix results and Nations Cups in between. To date, what has been the result that's brought you the most personal satisfaction throughout your international career?
I think you have to go to when we won the Europeans in Gothenburg. We were down to 3 men for the second round of the team, and probably no one gave us maybe a chance to pull it over the line, but we did, and that was special. Obviously, that was special to win the gold in the circumstances that we were in. That really does stand out.
And looking forward, even it can either be in the short or medium term or long term, is there something very clear in your mind that you're going after, or you want to tick off the list?
I honestly, at this stage of my life, I try not to think too far ahead. I think when I was younger, you think, Olympics and World Championships and this and that. And, in 2 years' time, who knows, a horse sound, not sound, or whatever. But so I try to have a plan for the year with goals now. And so obviously the World Championships is I think it's a great goal for the summer for Gizmo. So that's where I'm at the moment.
We're on to the last question. Similarly with our first 2 guest speakers, for you, speaking to either younger riders in the room or younger riders that are going to be listening to it, what advice or pieces of advice would you give to the younger riders that are coming through that want to have a successful international career?
As I said at the start, I think work ethic is a massive thing. And I think you have a good work ethic, whether you want to be an international rider or have a good career in different fields of this. I think you can. So I always say work ethic.
We're not going to let him go, but can you please put your hands together for Shane Sweetnam? Would anybody like to go with the first question for any of our speakers here? Lower up the front here, Holly.
Hi. My question is for Dr. Walbornn, and I think I'd love to hear how you advise your clients on those very, very special mares that have stayed so sound that they had long, long careers. And I'm thinking of just a couple of days ago, I heard about a dressage mare, Olympic dressage mare, Delara, who just had a filly a few days ago. And she carried that filly, and I believe it was her first foal. So, but I wonder about which I think is amazing and wonderful, but I also wonder about the thought process on whether or not, you know, actually for the older mares who are maidens, the carry versus ET, and we talked also about the epigenetics and things like that. I just love your thought process on that.
Thank you for your question. I think it's sometimes a difficult decision, as every mare is an individual, so we have to treat them as so. I think that if they're sound and they're older, you might have a little bit more options available to you than some of the ones who potentially aren't sound and couldn't carry a foal to term. In regard to how old a mare can be, if they should carry or not, I don't think we have an age cutoff. I think that as a mare ages, she's going to have changes in her uterus that potentially will not be able to sustain a foal throughout the entire pregnancy. So I think that's where our breeding soundness examinations, when we first look at our mares, come into play. If she's over 17 or even in her, older than that, I might advise performing a uterine biopsy if you do want to have the mare carry to term, so that we can have a better idea as to what that uterine environment is going to be for that entire pregnancy. I mentioned the cervix earlier as well. I think that's very important too. When we're breeding mares, specifically ones that have never had a foal before, we're going to have a little bit more trouble evacuating that uterus when it hasn't been dilated previously. So I think it's just working with your veterinarian and figuring out the best plan for your mare. I don't have a good cutoff for you, I'm sorry, but I think that it can be done to breed older mares. I just think that potentially we have to tread lightly in some occasions, and in others not, and maybe they'll get the green light. Did that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
It's with me? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for everything. I love to hear everything that you guys said. I have a question for Alex about the epigenetic. I am a vet as well, and I think this theme has been the trend of the moment. We have been talking about a lot about this. I would like to know your opinion when you cannot transfer the embryo to the desired mare, if you have to use a recipient mare and you have few options. I'm going to give you some options. That's what we usually have here in the United States. So you can have a very nice quarter horse, you can have a very nice thoroughbred, or you can have a breed between both, or sometimes draft horses. I would put them in the same basket. They all had babies, and we know they are good moms. So, of course, we would love to have the international mare that could carry that embryo, but we know that this sometimes is not possible. So in this scenario, which one would you pick?
I would definitely go with the thoroughbred. I'm a thoroughbred man by heart. My dad was a racehorse trainer. I love thoroughbreds. And I think the modern sport horse, there was a lot of thoroughbred bred into them. And as long as it's a mare, I think the mares do teach the foals quite a few things even when they're first born. And so if that was a good mother and she has a good brain and she was a good sound animal, I would go with a thoroughbred or a thoroughbred cross.
Wow. Thank you for answering this question. I mean, of course, I feel very nice about your answer because I feel the same. What I have seen is, especially here in Florida, that we have a very hot weather. The quarter horse and the draft horses that we, of course, like to use because they are a little bit more, easier to handle and everything. They just stand in the middle of the pasture and the babies stand with them. And what I have seen for thoroughbreds, they keep walking. They take the baby here, they take the baby there, they don't stop. And the baby just follow them. And of course, we have to be very careful when we are selecting the thoroughbreds. We are not talking about that mare that somebody gave you when she was 4 years old because she's crazy. We are not talking about this type of thoroughbreds. We are talking about thoroughbreds that had babies and now they're not used for thoroughbred babies anymore. So thank you so much for your input on this. And it was really, really nice hearing all you guys shared. Thank you.
My question is for Jayne and Alex. In your opinion, what makes a great equitation horse?
Definitely the brain, and they have to have, I call them the workhorses of the industry, that they have to want to work. If there's any sourness in the horse, it's not going to be a good equitation horse. It has to do its job day in and day out, over and over again. So they have to have the mentality that they like work, they want to work, and they're willing to do work every day. And then probably the second most thing is that their rideability. They have to have a good mouth. To be a top equitation horse these days, you need the rideability, and that hasn't changed for years. I mean, those are two very important factors.
It's more Alex's field than mine, but I agree with him. The kids' horses, like Colin and Olivia ride, they're so good at their job. They love coming to work every day. They do round after round, and they do their job the same every day because they like it. And then, like you said, they're so rideable. It's a key factor because the finals, they have to be able to add, they have to be able to leave out, they have to be able to do everything. So the rideability is a massive factor.
Thank you.
I have a question for Alex, if that's okay.
Breeding horses gives great satisfaction, but do you find that, obviously you can't choose the talent, the veterinary, the x-rays, do you still find it's more economical to breed your horses than to buy these talented horses as young horses, just with the cost?
I've found it more economical. I mean, I raise them in such large quantities. I don't want to say I raise them like cattle, but they're in big sheds. They get fed together. They grow up in a herd, so to speak, and that was able to keep the cost down when I had as many that I had. They're not all kept in a stall and raised like I don't know. They're not hothouse flowers. They're raised in a herd. They grow up in a herd, and it kept the cost down for me. So it was definitely cheaper for me to raise them and breed them in the United States than it would have been for me to buy them and import them and bring them over here.
Random question. In terms of breeding with a mare, do you guys believe in giving like a break after, say, you have a breeding mare, you get 3 foals? Do you think it's good to give them a break after that, or at a certain age, or how do you guys feel about if you have a mare that's just breeding and that's what she's doing? Maybe she got retired from sport and she has 10 years of breeding in front of her. Do you go 10 in a row, or do you think that there should be a break in between? Sorry, Michael.
No problem.
So I can start with that answer, and then if anybody else has anything to add. So I think the uterus is happiest when it is pregnant. So if you can continue to keep your mare pregnant every year, her uterine health, as long as there's no abnormalities or trauma during foaling or throughout pregnancy, I think that you're going to be better off in the long term with your uterine health. There are many scenarios where mares have foals when they're young, and then they go into sport, and then we're working on them in the future. I think that it's still good that they have had those foals in the past. Again, uterine health being one, and then cervical health as well. They have that cervical dilation initially that will continue to help us in the future when we're going ahead and breeding them, maybe mid-career or after their career.
I totally agree. If my mare comes into heat in the spring, I breed her. And we keep breeding her until we don't get a baby out of her. And I mean, she may skip a season on her own, and we don't get her caught that season, and she catches the next season. So I mean, we're constantly trying to produce babies because that's what we do. So we don't intentionally give them a year off. I think nature gives them a year off if they truly need it now and then. But if they come into season and they're a brood mare, we're going to breed them and try to produce a baby out of them. Touching back on age, I had a maiden 34-year-old pony, and she had a fantastic baby. And she never cycled the entire time I owned her and showed her. We showed her for years. She was a top pony. And she came into season one fall when we had a stallion there, and I said, oh, let's breed old Chanel and see what happens. And she had a foal at 34. So we never give up.
You can keep the mic, because I was curious, and again, this is broad, every case is different. What do you wish every mare owner knew before they came to you?
That no question is a stupid question, honestly. And that really your veterinarian is here to help you, and we both want the same thing. So I think, again, come with questions, come with, if you don't know anything, that's okay. We're here to guide you in the right direction.
And one for Shane, similarly to the question about the equitation horse, because I had a similar thought process. In terms of, I'm always curious, people that are involved at a high level in the sport, riding top level horses, seeing, buying, selling. Anything we do this year, we're not really going to see the true long-term effects of for 10 plus years before those horses are at the top of the sport. Are there any things that you think show jumping breeders need to be considering that differ from your answers on the equitation side in terms of what the characteristics we really need to be focusing on for 10 years down the track are going to be?
I think nowadays, because obviously there's a lot more dialogue about it, that breeders are aware of what they should be trying to do. The sport keeps evolving, so the breeders have to keep evolving. So and like Alex said earlier, it's important to have a top mare. I think the mare makes up for most of it. So I would be echoing what Alex says, that make sure you have a good mare with a good history, and a good genetic history, and I think that can take you fairly far, even in 10 years, because say Rural Juror is a grandson or great-grandson of Wellington. Spikos started with Wellington, and there's been so many Grand Prix jumpers from Wellington, but this is 15 years ago, so the good lines will go forever if you treat them the right way.
Holly, you're not going to get away. As well as supporting this event and all the research that I mentioned, I thought it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't touch on another event that you're supporting that's coming up, because some people that are here might be heading north to Ocala for Live Oak. Could you tell me what about the event that you're supporting in Ocala this weekend?
Yes, we are having another event similar to this one. We're doing a live taping of the Plaidcast podcast. We have some great speakers on board. We have Dr. Smith speaking with us from Peterson Smith. And he'll kind of cover musculoskeletal soft tissue injuries. We have course designer Olaf going to go over the differences in the driving and the show jumping tracks. at Live Oak, and then we also have combined driver Jacob Arnold that's going to be speaking with us. So if you're free on Saturday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, we're going to have another one of these great thought-provoking discussions that has the horse at the center. So we hope you'll join us there. Thank you.
We have one more question in the crowd that we missed there.
Yeah, sorry. I just have a small question. I have a small breeding program, and I was wondering if you have a recommendation about the age to wean the foals, and also the age to geld a colt. Does it affect his like potential as a show jumper, depending on how early or late you would geld a colt?
I've bred quite a few of my mares as 3-year-olds and have them foal out as 4-year-olds. I call it I'm stealing a foal out of them, so before they actually really get to work, I get a baby. I call it for free because they're growing up anyway. And my young stallions, I wait to geld them until they tell me they need to be gelded. So if I truly think they're going to be a top international show jumper and they're manageable and they have a good disposition, they get to keep their testicles. As soon as they start showing me signs that they're not going to be, I've got too many kids, I've got too many aspects of where my business is that I can't have an unruly stallion. So if they start to show any signs of unruliness, they get cut.
And just, I think part of the question was also about the age that you wean the foals as well. What's your preferred?
I wean them usually around 9 months. I've weaned some as early as 4, but anywhere between 6 and 9 months is usually when I wean them.
Thank you.
This question is for Shayne, but maybe also for Alex. Shayne, you talked a lot about the hard work that it takes for young people that come here to break into the sport and be something and all of that opportunity. How do you manage, I guess, those young people that are working really hard are the same young people that are riding the young horses, breaking the young horses, bringing them up for you while you're busy at Top Sport. How do you manage the stewardship of proper education for the young horses along with the stewardship and proper education for the young athletes? And maybe Alex, you can answer that question at the same time, because I think so many of the same lessons have to be learned by horses and people as they learn the ropes together.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the younger riders in America especially, it's experience, like the kids that have worked with Alex, or the kids that have worked with Spy Coast or Hidden Creek or whoever. If they get experience of working with young horses all the time and they're good horsemen or horse girls, they adapt and they learn how to produce a horse. Now, if you want to go further afield and they're that ambitious and they can't find a place here in America, then you go to Europe for a little bit and you go to these young horse programs and try to learn and bring back those tools to be able to do it over here. And it's an important aspect of it, of producing young horses. But if you watch the 7-year-olds here, I have to say the Americans are doing a great job with them. So there is definitely potential for that.
I think having a watchful eye on them at all times is, I mean, kids will be kids and young riders will be young riders. My young horses don't go out of the barn unless I'm in the ring and watch them work. I mean, I'm very protective. I don't want to say don't trust anybody, but I certainly don't trust kids or young riders to be left alone for long periods of time. So I really try to oversee all of the riding that gets done and most of the handling that gets done in the barn, because I think just that, they need to be taught, they need to understand, they need to learn patience. Those are things that most great riders aren't really born with. That, you know, as Shayne's touched on, it's a hard business. I mean, they have to learn to work hard and they have to love it. Otherwise they're gonna succeed because it's too hard of work. But if somebody's not there steering the ship, they're not going to rise to the top. You know, it really takes a lot of supervision to produce a good horse and a good rider.
I just want to say, I was here last year. You guys do a great job. This was a great panel. I really appreciate, we're breeders in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm from here. We come here every year. We produce a lot of young horses for clients that are showing at the top of sport here. So I really appreciate Alex's comments about being a breeder in the U.S. and how you can do it in a way that is thoughtful and they can be raised in herds. And you know, there is an economical portion of it that can be accomplished here in the United States. But I want to touch on the fact that on top of that, if you're in the right area and you can do it well, and we're lucky that we're here in Wellington with Rood and Riddle here, but we're also in Lexington with Rood and Riddle there. And we've been really fortunate to work alongside some of the best vets, I think, in the country at Rood and Riddle and other clinics nearby. But can you talk a little bit, Dr. Walbornn, about the advanced science, and you kind of talked about what we have access to with the Grayson Jockey Club, but also just with Gluck and all of the other opportunities. I mean, we ourselves, we're constantly testing for, all of our foals get PCRs at day one. And we take all those results every year and we talk to our biologic company every year, and we have custom plasma done every year. And so we're constantly dialing in that health component and utilizing the science that I think we're leading the way in the world with here in this country because of foundations like this and the educational opportunities that we have and the top vets that we have. But also, you know, we utilize people like Dr. Posh, who's one of the leading conformation specialists in the country. She looks at our foals at day 7 to 10 and advises our podiatrists. We use podiatrists with our foals from day 14 on to look at conformation flaws and fix anything. So we're very preventative, and I think that that's something that, I think there's this idea that, well, we can't do it as cheap as they can do it in Europe, but what are we sacrificing by doing it that way? And I think that there's a discussion to be had on the forefront of the science part of it and the preventative part of it and the quality of what we're able to produce here. It is a little bit more expensive, yes, but I think we're ultimately creating a higher quality horse overall. And I'm not saying competitively, but I think that we should talk more about the forefront of the science part of it.
I think you bring up a really good point. We are very lucky to have so many experts that do work for Rood and Riddle, as well as have a recipient herd of mares that we can utilize to help start clinical studies and continue ongoing science or new projects. So I think it's me as a veterinarian at first, but as a scientist second. I think we're always looking for clinical projects and to collaborate with different companies, with other veterinarians, with academic institutions in order to really be on the forefront of equine medicine. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it is really important to put that out there.
I have a question for Alex. What is your veterinary screening process for your young horses? Do you do screening radiographs? Do you do conformation exams, as she mentioned? What's kind of the process as you weed in and out your young horses as they come into work?
I'm very involved in, and I'm not going to say I'm a veterinarian, but I have a lot of veterinarian experience. And knock wood, I don't think I've ever raised a crooked-legged horse. I mean, it's just, I've had extraordinarily good DNA from the start, and my horses all have 4 straight legs, and I've been blessed in that area. But we do shoot x-rays on them early, because, I mean, I've had few, but there have been a few that have OCDs or things that if you address early, they can still go on and have a great career. I just had one that had 2 OCDs as a yearling that we took out. He showed me, I mean, his joint was looking a little puffy and I didn't think it looked normal, and I usually don't x-ray them until I'm ready to bring them down here, but that particular colt I x-rayed as a yearling because I said, something's not right. It's the joint just didn't look normal. And sure enough, he had an OCD in it, and we popped it out, and it looks great, and hopefully he'll go on and be a super athlete. But trying to keep the cost down, I just don't go through and shoot x-rays of all of them as yearlings. I know some people do. I wait until I'm ready to bring them here. Before I spend the money, bring them to Wellington, I make sure I have a clean set of x-rays on them before they get on the trailer.
So I'm conscious of the time, and that the panel that have joined me have very generously given up what is probably in short supply in terms of their free time to be here for the benefit of all of us and all that are going to listen. So for my panel and for our sponsors, Grayson, can you please put your hands together